What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I am here today with my friend Abhinav. Welcome back, Abhinav.
Hi, John. Really great to be back again.
Man, your video that we did on Flow being created in Visio has been on fire. And so I just want to thank you for coming back and being willing to share some more stuff with us today.
Absolutely. More than happy to be part of the community, contribute to it. It's amazing, all the tools that you guys develop. So happy to do this, John. Really
Awesome.
grateful. Yeah.
Awesome. So Abhinav works for Arcadis. They're a consulting firm. They do a lot of awesome stuff. He'll show a little bit of some of the things they've done. And the beauty of it is he comes here today to share openly some of their techniques that you guys can actually go ahead and use. And so again, today he's doing that with us. So Abhinav, without further ado, the floor is yours, my friend. Go ahead and share your screen, reintroduce yourself, and tell us, what are you teaching us today?
Absolutely. Thank you, John. So, like you were saying, I work for Arcadis, right? I'm a business advisory consultant. I do a lot of data and digital process leads for quite a few different projects through and through, where we automate different parts using different technologies, right? And a lot of Microsoft tools so that we can empower our clients with data-driven insights and provide kind of a single source of truth for all their information. But what we're kind of talking today is a lot about the automation of some of these parts, right? And approvals is such a huge piece to automating all these items when we look at through and through and giant processes where we are talking about thousands of audits that are happening throughout the year across different clients, where so many man hours are involved on gathering all the information, right? Like you were saying earlier, last time we did this, right? We were talking about Visio, how we could automate some of those items, how we could bring to life the process over there. And I thought, in this time, when we look at a different segment of the process, when we're talking about assessments, we can kind of think through, all right, how do we automate all of the assessment, different elements and different stages that they flow through using approval. So that's what I thought would be really good to cover today.
Awesome. I love that. And it looks like you got a couple pieces of the stack here represented that we're going to touch. So that's great, man. So go ahead, jump in, show us what we're working with.
Absolutely. So just to kind of give you a little bit background, right, on what happens if it's an assessment, or you don't necessarily need to think of it as an assessment per se. This could be for invoices. This could be for any element of the process or any document that needs to go through different approvals, right? You need to go through your boss's boss. It needs to go through different segment leads. And then the final document needs to then be pushed to a folder where it goes through an approved stage by stage process. But just going back to the assessment theory a little bit, when we have different assessments to kind of show you what it would look like, right? It goes through an initial upload, it goes through a legal review, we go through a program manager approval, and then we approve all the audit files in a single location. And that's the final information that we want to put in Power BI. Now, usually without Power Automate, we would have had to do manual emails. Hey, we've sent this file, go check it, or put it on the email. They see it, they don't see it. We need to follow up and do all of those different steps, which becomes a huge pain, right, overall. So Power Automate helps us automate all these processes and trigger it automatically to send those notifications to the people who need to be involved in that process. So I think it's really powerful when we look at that.
Awesome. I think what you said is key there. Is just think of this in stages. Any process that requires separate stages, this process is going to outline for you. So whether it's assessments or invoices or whatever. So that's good. Cool.
Definitely. And just to kind of tie it back to our Visio theme that we did last time too, right? I created a template using Visio for Power Automate again, right? Where it outlines the step-by-step process for how an approval process could be automated in Visio and Power Automate. So when a new assessment is uploaded, right, the assessment details are kind of captured. It starts the approval process. And when I say assessment details are captured, the details of the file, right? Yep. It's important that we have the information of the file so that we can feed that into the emails and notifications when we trigger the approval processes, so that it's a conjunction of both that information, and it empowers the person who's approving or rejecting your email, your assessment before it moves to the next stage.
You
But
want to you want to make
go
sure
ahead.
it's rich, right? You want to make sure that it's rich and full of information, so that way the approver doesn't have to go and hunt information down. They have everything at their hands, and so that's why we try and gather as much information as we can up front, so we can
Yeah.
avoid all that secondary communication, and they just can make a decision.
Yep, absolutely. And just interestingly, a small pivot on that is the fact that you can dynamically put in information from different key elements is really powerful, right? Because
Yeah.
when you're using, quote unquote, this is just the email part where you're using those dynamic elements for which the end user can see, but you're using information from the approval, you're using information from your file assessment. And we'll get to it a little bit more when we show the cross flow itself, but I think that's really powerful overall.
Definitely.
Yep. And coming to here, right, once the approval process kind of triggers, then it goes into either it's approved or not approved, right? In its most simple basis, right? And once
Yep.
it is approved, we need an email that needs to be triggered with information that we can send to the user. And then if it is approved, we move it to the next stage in the process, right? In this case, we decided that if it is not approved and if it's rejected, the assessment gets deleted with a notification that we can kind of create. And that's something that different processes can do it differently, right? These are some process elements that we have defined as a template for an assessment. This could
Yep.
be anything, right? Depending on what your process can be outlined to be.
Love it. Cool.
Awesome. Just one additional element that I wanted to touch base on is not necessarily all of this needs to be started on a Visio, right? This is one way to do it. I
Yeah.
think it's important to kind of know that you can do this in multiple ways. And I'll kind of show you one other way that we use quite a bit, but
Okay.
you could start from Microsoft Power Automate itself. And additionally, because of the beautiful integrations that you guys have, we can also start from the Teams SharePoint itself, right?
Nice.
So when you click on the SharePoint over there, it kind of takes you to the backbone document library of that Teams site, right? And when it does, you get all these elements of the links to different Microsoft tools already. Thinking through what we had just said, we wanted to talk about, let's say, just the initial upload, right? This is where you wanted to trigger it. So you can kind of go to this initial upload. You can kind of click on Power Automate and then create a flow. Now, the beautiful part about this is it not only has the elements that you can start, but you can also see all the different options within here itself when you click on the Show More button, right? So you have all the different activities that you could have done, but you can also see what happens when you want to do approvals, for example, for a selected file per se, or you can also start off from a custom one to trigger a custom action when a file is uploaded. So there's a lot of possibilities that you can start off from when you kind of do this.
Nice.
Yeah. Awesome. So just going back quickly to the Visio itself to move on through that story, right? For example, when we hit export on here, so that entire Visio is kind of exported. Let's call it bringing to Orchestra Live V3, just because I've uploaded one before. And then when we create a flow, that entire process gets available over there. And then we can kind of go to Power Automate to kind of look at how that looks overall, right? Just to kind of make this a little bit more intuitive for our audience, I kind of went ahead and created a filled Power Automate template too, so that we can go through that. But this is what it can kind of look at and where it starts off from, right? That you can fill in the site address, library name, the folder, and so on and so forth. So quickly shifting to something that we have already created using the same logic, right? We look at the different steps that we have. So for example, over here, you can see that a new assessment is uploaded, right? There's a drop-down available and you can drop it down and then select the site address. For example, over here, it's the Teams site that we had uploaded those documents in, right? You can then select which library you're selecting it from, and then you can kind of select the folder where this particular action is being triggered from, right? So over here, it was the shared documents. In the shared documents, it was in general, in the document approval, in the initial upload, right? So that was what we were starting it from. Now, remember when I was showing this a little bit earlier on the SharePoint site itself, you could have done that too and kind of arrived at this stage and then additionally added these below elements to that too. Yep. So over here, when we do that, right, and then we, like I was showing in the visual, we collect the information of the file itself, right? So it's important over here, you know kind of which elements you are choosing, right? So over here, when you did upload this particular new site assessment and you're getting information of that particular file, it automatically gives you a dynamic ID, which is what you would want to pull in, right? It's when a particular file is uploaded, grab in that information and then store those details in this entity so that we can then use the details of that later on as we move along the process. So that's something key important to kind of know.
And this is just how Flow identifies a file. It assigns it this ID, and by Abhinav grabbing this ID, he says, give me all the information about that file I just uploaded. And now what he's able to do is pull the details of that particular file through the flow. And so by grabbing that single ID, by it being assigned it on the back end and then it coming up front, that's how we then track that single document and everything about it throughout the whole flow. And we call that dynamic content.
Yep. Absolutely. Thanks for that, John.
No problem.
And then we start the approval process itself, right? It's kind of key. You can automatically see through all Microsoft applications, you can see those star red marks, right? These are kind of the required fields through and through that you need to add in whenever the approval process is triggered. You have different ways to do this, right? You can have approve, everyone must approve, the first to respond, wait for all responses, kind of custom it at that point too, or you can leave it as simple as possible, right? So in our case, when we look at different assessments, we have 3 or 4 approvers where we have multiple people who need to look at a document. If any one of them kind of approve in terms of the program managers, it's okay to go to the next stage, right? For example, this was a legal approval. It's in the stage of the legal approval. That may not have been the same case, right? You have a set of people who need to look at the document before it moves to the next stage. Then you need to use, everyone must approve and then add in the rest of the elements to that. So just kind of important, again, go back to the process, set what is it the requirement is, and then you would be able to choose, exactly according to the need.
Yeah, I always like to say first to respond is a race. Whoever approves first wins, and wait for all to respond. That's obviously a group. Everyone has to do it. Doesn't matter who's there first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that element, because of the fact that Flow even stores who are the people who respond, right? So you can then you could have that race, to be honest, right? Where you could map out who are the people who are responding to the files.
Or you could build intelligence in that routed the files to the person that approved on time all the time, right?
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, so coming back to here, the kind of good part about Flow through and through, right, is the capability to have dynamic elements to it. And that's the same with approvals too, right? So for example, this email needs to trigger an approval and it's being sent to someone. In this case, I've just sent it to myself, right? It has the capability to get the name from the person who has uploaded the SharePoint information, right? And that's where, like I was saying earlier, getting that ID information for all of that so that it can become a dynamic content over here is kind of important, right? So if for example, I take out name, right, I could add in that name because I first gathered all that information from over there. So right now over here, this is the file name. I think I may have said it the other way around, but this is the file name, but you can also get information like who loaded it and things like that too. The other kind of key point over here is the assign to, right? And we were just discussing about this too, that it needs to be within your tenant, right? So that the person can approve it. That's just something important to keep in mind on who is it that this email can be triggered to. When we look at the details, obviously these kind of things are just as powerful as any email, right? The more custom you make it, the more information you provide to the approver, the more easier it is that they can look at the information and take a decision based on the information shared with them, right? They're empowered by whatever you do share with them. So over here, the fact that you can have kind of the dynamic capability to say that, all right, so this has been a file uploaded online for your approval by so and so, right? Requesting your review and response, make it a little bit more personal. Give them the link to the item. It's always helpful. It's not required, right? Like you can see the details in the item link. But this kind of weeds out the necessity for a person to need to go to the document library, open that particular file, and then come back and then do approvals, right? That's the whole reason that we want to automate more and more parts of these elements, because we don't want them to manually do it. We want them to more easily, more efficiently be able to do it, so that they can do more of these approvals, right? So they can actually be doing what they have the subject matter expertise in, and be more powerful when they're doing this. So providing them that item link, maybe even adding descriptions, and going through these advanced options and seeing what else you can be providing them if required, right? Maybe you have some best practices that you want to share each time whenever it goes to approvals, right? So things like that, just thinking through that is definitely important, and understanding which parts are dynamic versus which parts are fixed. That's just something that is important as we look at any part of Power Automate, but especially in approvals too, I feel.
Perfect. You nailed it. I don't have anything to add.
Right. Thanks, John. So based on that, right? So again, similar to what we were saying about the whole dynamic thing, it's not just the SharePoint file information that's dynamic, but all the information that gets fed into the approval part is also dynamic, right? And this is just something kind of important to kind of remember. So I'm just removing that just to kind of show you that point. So all these different elements are elements that get captured when that particular approval gets triggered and gets answered, right? So it's important for you to almost just know what these all are, not to in effect limit you from creating an approval, but so that you can empower the entire process a lot more, right? So just knowing this a little bit more kind of helps, and what I mean by that, it'll become a lot more clear in the later stage. But just coming back to this a little bit, it's important that you know how you're selecting the item over here, right? Outcome needs to be just approved, not approved, not approved with the space, not approved with quotes, right? You need to ensure that you're making the word wrap right, you're using the right syntax, and these are small things that you may miss out, but you may spend hours figuring out what the answer to that is, right? You may raise your head.
So even more specific, it has to be approved with a capital A. Yeah. If it's a lowercase a, it won't work. If it's in quotes, it won't work. If there's a space, it won't work. Alternatively, you can also work off of reject, R-E-J-E-C-T, not rejected, reject with a capital R. So the case is very important here. This is one of those nuanced things that if you don't know can cause you a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for that, John. It's just one of those things, right? You want it to be powerful. You need to be accurate with what you're feeding it over there. All these documents are available, right? Microsoft has brilliant documentation on all of these items. So, I would just definitely suggest people to just look at that when they are using all these different items and elements over here. And coming back to what happens after it approves, right? So over here, like we were discussing a little bit earlier, let's say it did get approved, right? And we go into the yes column. So we go into when it gets approved, I want to create an email. Now, interestingly, you'll see that one, and this is just something interesting that happens, even if you don't create an apply to each, Power Automate automatically does that for you, which is, I think, pretty awesome overall. Just kind of throwing that out there. But
sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on how the workflow is, right? And how you want it to work.
Yes. In this case, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good to know. Good to point that out too. But yeah, absolutely. And coming down to this over here, the email notification itself. Over here, you'll see that from the approval, I've built in the response comments too, right? And similar to what I was showing earlier, right? You have all the different elements available over here. And then you can kind of choose the fact that you want to see the response comments from what the approver has kind of said. So what this kind of lets you do is it's not just sending a blank email to a person saying, hey, your thing is rejected. What does that person do? Or, hey, your thing is approved. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person needs to pick up the phone or Skype in or, team into the other person and figure out what is it that they should be adding in or what they should be changing. But you are working those elements as part of your approval automation process too, so that they get the information on why is it that it has been approved or why is it that it has been rejected, right? So that they can do the necessary action. And it also tells you, that it gives you kind of the personalized feeling so that you can automatically send it to the person who had in the initial created that file from the beginning itself, right? It's not some random person, it's not a static element. It sends it to the assessor in this case, or to the invoice uploader who had put in and who had uploaded that file itself. So these kind of elements are kind of, once you get into the hang of it, I think it becomes almost obvious. Yes, we should have this, but I think it's really powerful, the fact that you can do this. It's an automation that you don't need to each time go to a list, each time change. It's dynamic in that nature. So I just thought bringing that out and sharing that was kind of powerful.
It's good stuff. Awesome. And now the most important step for this approval is this final one.
Absolutely. So what happens when you approve or when you reject, right? We need some action to happen. One is, yes, you sent an email, then what, right? So we move it to the next stage when it gets approved. All right. So we figure out the same, similar to how we had identified the site address, right? And then you need to kind of choose the file that you need to move. Now, this file to move, just in very simple terms, you need to tag it to the file identity that you want to move it to, right? The property of that file. And the way that Power Automate kind of does it is it uses the identifier for that particular file. And you can then use that to move a file, delete a file, and do a lot of it too. There are different ways to do this, right? This is one easy way to do it. You could have, instead of choosing the file identifier, almost move, select the folder, move to that path, and then instead of adding that particular file, you could have kind of made that element dynamic by creating a slash and then the file name over here. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it gets a little bit more trickier to make it work in the right way. The easiest, best way that I found is using the identifier. It's safe. It ensures that that is the key almost for that unique file. So
I would recommend, I would recommend stick with the identifier. It's going to make life a lot easier for you.
Yep, absolutely. And you can see,
this action right here, real quick, this is the move a file action inside of SharePoint actions.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
so that's actually a good point that you also brought up. And just to let folks know, you can rename it, right? So it not necessarily needs to be assessment move next to stage. Now, you can either rename it over here, or you could have renamed it in the visual like we were showing it before, and that automatically truncates over here too.
Awesome.
But that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that on.
For sure. Yeah. I think it's great that you rename all your steps. I think everyone should rename their steps, but for someone who's building this, I think, it's important for them to know what they're going to search for when looking for that step.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. And so now, real quick, can we go back to the teams just to remind everyone how the 4 stages break down? See how you have 4 different folders here? And so his final action inside of that flow basically takes it from the initial upload folder and moves it down to the legal review folder, where then he would have a whole nother approval process that would kick off as soon as something enters that legal review. And likely this one would be a little bit different. It would be a wait for all to respond. It would have some additional audit steps. And so what's great about this is he can compartmentalize this process to fit each department's needs individually. And also, he's kind of faking something that we don't have, which is called state machine. And so being able to go back and forth between these different folders gives you a fake state machine, which is something that a lot of people need and want. And so this is a very simple, easy, and affordable way to get state machine. So cool. Back to you, bud. Sorry.
No, absolutely. I think that was kind of key element over there itself, right? The fact that you can move it through different files, and the fact that you can almost automate the moving of them from one stage to the other, and do that rejection and approval and so on and so forth, right? And just talking about the state machine, even if it gets rejected on, like, let's say the third step, you could have it automatically go up all the way to the first step instead, right? Instead of it just going to the previous step. So you can play around with the different permutations and combinations over there.
You could even have another condition there, right? That decided. You could have someone in that third stage decide if they rejected, where did they want it to go? Does it go back to the first? By using a custom approval, we could then reroute it special ways. So a lot of options there. Awesome. This is very, very cool.
Absolutely. I think the last just kind of final touch point and kind of reminder to folks is, for example, the same process over here on the rejection side of the house. Again, responses and comments is extremely important, right? The dynamic elements are really important. And something that, I was finding funny earlier was the fact that this is named as file to move. This is file identifier, but it's the same thing, right? Just keep in mind, what is it that you're looking for and why, what is it that you're trying to move? Just key important something that you keep in mind as you're doing it. And kind of Microsoft helps you with it a little bit too, right? So over here, when it says file identifier, it says select a file. And over here, it says file to move, but it lets you know, hey, it's a file identifier.
Nice.
It lets you know what is it that you need to select so that you can make the appropriate actions, but something really key so that you don't go into the rabbit hole of figuring out what is it that you need to attach over there. But other than that, I think this was kind of the key elements that I wanted to touch on, John.
Awesome.
We can definitely do a lot more overall, but this was like a really key step that we were able to templatize, automate, and provide it to different key projects through and through throughout Arcadis. So really happy that we were able to share this with you.
Very cool. I just love how you turn everything into Visios that you can just hand out and re-templatize, and it becomes just another tool in the stack, right? It's not something that has to be redone all the time. It's something that can just be handed off. And so I love how you guys are automating.
Absolutely.
It's like it's automateception, and so I love it. I think it's really, really cool stuff.
Definitely going to use that term in one of our meetings and see how.
Yes, you can. It's all yours. It's all yours. Okay, great. So hey, you guys get connected with Abhinav. Abhinav, we have some links for you, right? There's some ways for people to get a hold of you. We'll have those down in the description. So be sure to check down there for those. As always, click like, click subscribe so that you don't miss any more videos, because we'll be back with more goodness again next week. All right, guys. Much love from me. I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.